Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is such a fabulous guest that this is the second time I've had her on the Natural Healing Show. And you're going to really want to listen to what she has to say because we are going to be talking about what we can do to prevent teen suicide. Now, the statistics show that unfortunately in the United States, suicide is the second leading cause of death for Americans 10 to 24 years old. So as a culture, as a society, as a globe, we want to come together and protect our loved ones. Tammy Joy Lane is a very special person. She is an Iraq veteran. We thank her for her service to our world. And she is a suicide attempt survivor. So she understands what goes on in someone's head when they're thinking about suicide and when they're attempting suicide. She is the author of the book, Putting the Pre in Appreciation. And you can find out more about Tammy Joy Lane and her wonderful work at her website, yestokindness.com. Welcome, Tammy Joy Lane.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm so happy to be here.
So Tammy Joy Lane, as a medical intuitive healer, whenever I get contacted, usually by a parent, about a teenager, I always treat these people as being very precious because teenagers do not have the life experience that you and I have. I'm 63 now. I've lived through a lot. They do not have a life experience and they don't have the toolkit that many of us have, especially many of us here at the Natural Healing Show. I practice yoga, I meditate, I pray. There's a long list of things that I do to be healthy and happy every day. But our teenagers, they don't know this information yet. How do we help teens, Tammy Joy Lane, when we feel like we get barked at if we offer to help them?
Okay, so this is such a hard topic because when someone's in a suicidal state, it's not like they're just open arms, yeah, I want help. It's you're to a point where you feel like you have nothing left to live for. You like when I was suicidal, I could rationalize myself out of my own life. So if someone approached me, I would kind of attack them. And I had this real quick story I want to share. I went running and there was this seal and it was choked around its neck. And so it swam over to me and I reached out to untangle its neck and it barked at me. And that's exactly what it's like. They are drowning, they are dying. You can see they're not okay, but also the approach matters. So what ended up happening, he was choking with this ball around his neck and I just held the space for him to figure it out. So as I held this ball, it would stay there and he could figure it out. And that's what we have to do is hold the space so they can figure it out and not approach like it's too intense. We're too intense sometimes.
Great observation. Now, Tammy Joy Lane, we know from your bio that you're an Iraq veteran Iraq veteran and a suicide attempt survivor. Would you be willing to share for our audience when you attempted suicide? How old were you, and what was going on in your mind at that time?
So I was 21. I was in Baghdad. Oh gosh, just I felt overwhelmed. I felt like life hadn't gone as planned. I went to Iraq married and then I got divorced on leave. And so it was just like a lot of changes. Transitions, a big time we got to watch out for people. You know, transitions, death, divorce, moving, the new kid at school, their parents are getting divorced. Any kinds of transition, that's a big trigger. And so what's funny is I saw this thing on Facebook this morning. It says, your mind is not programmed to let you fail or succeed. It's programmed to repeat. And so we get in these loops and then they just keep repeating. And so, like with the yoga and meditation, if we could teach our kids to do this, then we could get new patterns to repeat, because that's what our brain likes, is pattern repetition. Oh, let's go to that superhighway. You have a suicide superhighway? Let's go there. But if we can create off ramps and pathways and let our kids know that once they start going down this suicidal road, there's a safe off ramp, we can get off, then it's okay.
So you were 21 at the time. And why, in your opinion, as a suicide attempt survivor and the author of the book, Putting the Pre in Appreciation, why, in your professional opinion, are so many teenagers committing suicide? What's your thought on that?
So I think it has a lot to do with how we talk about each other and about ourselves. So, like me, I have 3 daughters. So if I'm looking in the mirror and thinking, gosh, my hair is gray and my belly's fat, and saying all this, then how are they supposed to see the beauty in them when they came from me? And so one day I had gotten this thing to get my stomach skinny, and someone on TV had it, and they're like, Mom, look, she has that thing you're wearing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know they were realizing this. But it's like, just let you be okay. Because if you aren't okay, how can they be okay? They're just little yous.
That's a really great observation. And I have to share this story because just last night I received an email from a mother. I haven't spoken to her or her daughter yet. And the mother said, my daughter is having fainting spells. And the lady was reaching out to me. The mother was reaching out to me for a mother medical intuitive reading to want to understand what was happening. My daughter's having fainting spells. The doctors say it's just depression. There is a family history of suicide, and she's deathly afraid that her daughter's going to commit suicide. So I agree with you. And then I spoke with a mother this morning, actually, and I said to the mother, I strongly recommend that you get help, because as parents, we are energetically connected to our children, and our children are always observing us and literally attuned to us. And they're looking to us not only for guidance, but about what's wrong and right. And they listen to what we say and also what we don't say and how we live our lives. So if we're unhappy with the world, if we're unhappy with ourselves, then, as you say, then our teenagers go, well, what chance do I have? So I agree with you that as a parent, one of the things that's so critical to do is that a parent fills his or her own well, which is easier said than done, that a parent finds their own inner peace, so that everyone in the home can resonate and align with that. And if you're not at peace with yourself and with your life, then it's harder, much harder, for your children to be at peace and to find contentment within themselves. So, Tammy Joy Lane, how do you think the way we talk about talk affects our teens?
Yeah, so I think how we have so much power with our words, and we're doing a very crappy job at managing it. And so we need to realize everything we say affects our kids. And one thing is how we talk about others affects how they feel about themselves too. I remember being a teenager and my mom was going off about this other person's kid, and I thought, oh my gosh, if she knew what I was doing, she would hate me too. And so it's this idea of like, if you're putting the neighbor down, if you're judging the politician, if you always have something negative to say, then that's the programming we're giving our kids. And what flipped for me when I went from like suicidal to an author or suicidal to a TEDx talk, I started changing the way I looked at other people. So everyone I would see, I would say, hey, I love your hair today, or wow, you look good in blue. And it wasn't these life-changing compliments of like, your soul is resonating with my soul. It was like, wow, your hair looks good. People spend a lot of money on their hair. Notice it. Just start looking for the good in others. And as you see the good in others, then you can start to see it in yourself.
Great observation. And, you know, Albert Einstein, I always go back to what Albert Einstein said. He said the most important question is whether or not you consider the universe to be a friendly place. So again, going back to us as parents, is if we look out and see, you know, enemies everywhere and the bad guys, and the world is, you know, falling apart and the world is full of evil people, and that's what we project, then we're projecting a vision of hopelessness and helplessness onto our children. And I think it's hard enough for kids growing up. So as you say, we need to be very careful about the vision of the world that we're projecting for our children, because we're literally programming them with our thoughts. And it's only as they become older and wiser that they can sit down and go, well, what my mom said, well, that was true or not true, or what my dad said, that was true or not true. So so that leads me to the next question. How does the way we talk about ourselves affect our teens?
So it's just that idea that they are a little us. And so it's like when people split and you talk mean about their dad, you're talking about them because they're half them. And so it's realizing that our words about ourselves are never just about us. They're about at least the babies you've brought into this world. But not only that, it affects, if you're in a room with people and you look in the mirror and you're thinking, I'm so fat, and then someone next to you is a little bigger than you, they're like, just look in your mirror and love what you have, because your body you have right now is all you have. And if you can love you, then they can love them. And if you can love your wacky, spectacular person that you are, then people around you can find their wacky, spectacular and love that too.
Yes. And as a medical intuitive healer, and I'm stating the obvious, is that in the teenage years, our hormones are changing rapidly. And one of the things that we know is that hormones are some of the biggest drivers of behavior. And if you don't believe that, just think about what it feels like to be hungry. So when I'm really hungry, that's about all I can think about. I've even stopped interviews and said, let me get something to eat. So our hormones are changing, and that is a new experience for teenagers, which makes their feelings be extremely intense. And this intensity, which feels like something they can't control, drives so much of their emotional behavior. And I think that that's part of why when they're in a feeling and it feels so intense, they feel like they can't get out of it. And this leads to those feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, and even turning to impulsive choices like suicide. So any comments about that, Tammy Joy Lane?
Well, I think it's important to remember being a teenager. You know, our parents didn't know anything. They were irrational. It's like we forget what it's like. I remember when I had kids, I said, I'm never going to forget how horrible this is. I'm going to remember how hard it is and help every new mother. And now my kids are 8 and 9, and I'm not, no one with new babies is on my radar. And so it's like we forget that stage. And so I think if we just pause and don't engage in the rage of the hormones and just remember that we went through this and we made it, and they're going through this and they're going to make it. This is all just normal, and normalizing normal. It's when we take something that's very normal and make someone irrational, or, you know, label them as, there's so many labels now. Like I have to Google these things, words my kids come home with. I don't even know what they mean. And they're getting put down and calling each other these names. And it's like, that's when there's a problem, is when we start to, you know, label and misjudge normal.
Right. And I think that one of the most important messages that we can give our teenagers is you're normal. Even one of my clients in England, she asked me to do a medical intuitive reading for her daughter. And the mother said the daughter was so relieved because I said, you're normal. And the challenges that you're going through are normal for a person your age. It doesn't mean that you're broken or you're beyond repair or that you'll never be happy. So on that note, let's take a break and listen to a message from one of our sponsors. So Tammy Joy Lane, suicide attempt survivor, tell me about the ignore, criticize, freak out cycle and how to break it. What is that?
Okay. So have you ever felt like you're busy with work or you're busy with something and your kid's coming to you and they want your attention, but you're focused, so you're ignoring them. And then you go to them and they don't want to have anything to do with you. So you start criticizing, you know, why are you on your phone? Clean your room. And then there's some kind of freak out happens because when they wanted you, you.
Yes. And just so you know that your sound just dropped, and we really want to hear what you have to say. So, Tammy Joy Lane is the author of the book, Putting the Pre in the Appreciation, and an Iraq veteran and suicide attempt survivor. In my first interview with her for the Natural Healing Show, where we talked about what you can do to prevent suicide, one of the very helpful comments that she made is that if you think someone's suicidal, you need to ask their help for someone, ask their help for something. And Tammy Joy Lane, could you speak, and let's see if your sound is working again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, all right. If you'll go back to, we were talking about the ignore, criticize, freak out cycle.
Okay, so we ignore our kids when we're doing what we need to do. And then we approach them and they're engaged in something they want to do and they ignore us. And so then we freak out about something else because we can't control what they're doing. And then it causes.
Okay, and your sound just went out again. So this is really important that we hear what you have to say. So again, one of the things that Tammy Joy Lane said is that in our initial interview is that if you think someone's suicidal, ask their help for something. Because when someone asks me for help, then I realize, gosh, I may be valuable. I may be able to offer something to society, and it helps to remind someone of their self-worth. So Tammy Joy Lane, okay, let's try again. So hopefully we'll hear from you. Okay, so we're talking about the ignore, criticize, freak out cycle.
Okay, so once you go you know, when you're sitting there doing something and you're engaged and your kid approaches you and you ignore them because you're doing something and you're like, in a minute, I'll get to you. And then by the time you get to them, then they are engaged in something and they ignore you. And so what I have found, then I will find something to criticize and it will cause this eruption. And then it will lead back to ignore each other. Because if we just stay apart, there's no friction. But what I found is if my kid approaches me, if I set down what I'm doing, whatever it is, and I just look at them and I engage in that moment, because whatever I'm doing really is probably not that important. But to them, I pause, I give them the contact, I flip over my phone so that they know if they approach me, I'm approachable. And I'm not going to put anything first. And just getting in that habit of if they walk in the room, pause what I'm doing and give them that attention. That seemed to be helping a lot.
How can we connect with teenagers before we correct? I mean, I'm thinking about my niece because she was so adorable when she was young. And we always just like, if you would just stay 2 years old, oh my God, she was like a little doll. Now she's a teenager. And you'll say, well, how are you, Sarah Jane? Terrible question for a teenager. Fine, if you get that. So how can we connect with our teenagers before we correct them?
So funny thing, I was talking to my friend last night about this situation, and she said,
Okay, and we've lost your audio again. Unfortunately, this is so important that we hear what you have to say, but okay, we can't hear you. So I'm not able to hear you. So one of the things that I find as a medical intuitive healer is that I can read the connections between any two human beings. So in your body, you have energy centers called chakras. And when you are a parent, you are energetically connected to your child. It's just a question of where are you connected? The number one connection to have with a child, in my professional opinion, is heart to heart. Because when a child knows that they are loved unconditionally, and that means even if your grades aren't perfect, even if, you know, I don't look the way I think I should look, even if I've been bad, that they can begin to hear what we have to say. So Tammy Joy Lane, hopefully we can hear your voice now. How can we connect before we correct?
so one thing that's really important is to make sure the connection to correction ratio is very high on connection. It's easy to kind of ignore, correct. But it's just it's just like if a boss only talked to you when they had some correction, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't make you want to do better as an employee. And so if we look at our kids, like they are in their own process, in their own world, and they don't need to be corrected about every little thing all the time. And so if we can just connect, one thing I like to do is, what does love look like to you? You know, like, because I think I'm giving love. I'm giving these people a house, a home, food. I'm working all these hours for them. That doesn't feel like love to a teenager. That feels like you love that more than me. And I'm like, I'm trying not to be homeless here.
Yeah. So what you're saying is ask the teenager, what does love look like to you?
Yeah.
What a fabulous question. What an absolutely fabulous question. And going back to what you're saying about connection is these connections that we have with our loved ones, you can feel when they're there and you can also feel when they're not there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's much easier to be heard by anyone if you're connected heart to heart.
Exactly.
All right. Now, what about safety plans? So you're talking about safety plans to prevent suicide, correct?
Yes.
So do they work? And first of all, what is a safety plan and do they work?
Okay. Safety plans. Remember when we were little and on the fridge, you would have like the neighbor's number, your mom's number, and then 911. And it's a joke, like, quick, what's the number to 911? But when you're in crisis mode, there's no rational thought. You can't remember who loves you. You can't remember that you have any skills or any worth. And so a safety plan is more than just who am I going to call instead of jumping off a bridge. It's what skills do I have? What skills do I personally have that I could help myself? And then it's like, who could I talk to? And it's important to, make sure you have 24/7 people, because some people are just 9 to 5 people. And if you call a 9 to 5 person at 2 a.m., then it's not going to work for anyone. And so the safety plan is clarity, and it's putting a frame around, I know I'm going to be in crisis someday because that I'm in this world. 10 years ago, some people might get out of life without a mental health crisis. These days, I think everyone needs one.
Yeah.
It's too much right now. There's too much.
All right. So going back, we're talking about what is a safety plan. So again, what are the basic outlines of a safety plan?
Okay. So a safety plan is going to have people that you can call. It's going to have a hospital that you could go to. It's going to have a list. It's going to have a list of skills that you have. And then it's going to have a list of accomplishments. Because whenever I start spinning out in suicidal ideation, I can't remember anything. I can't remember I wrote a book. I can't remember of the positive impact I have made. And so it's kind of right there in your face, like, you're okay. You're going to make it through this. And there's people who are going to help you.
So as a parent of a teenager, if I was a parent of a teenager and I was concerned about my child, whether they were being suicidal, would I sit down with my child and put together this safety plan? Would that be a good way of doing it? Tammy Joy Lane?
Yeah, definitely together. But not like the approach matters, so it's not when anyone's in crisis that you're going to be putting together. It's after the crisis, when things have calmed down and there's a little bit of light. So if someone's like, I'm suicidal, you're like, we're going to put together a safety plan. No. So timing matters and approach.
All right, so putting it together. And I love that you talked about having people who you have agreed up with ahead of time that you could call at 2 a.m.
Exactly.
And I know this is so critical. I'll just put it vaguely, one of my dear friends has a teenager who called someone at 5 a.m. and and the person picked up the phone and talked him through. And it is so important. So how do we find these people who are willing to talk to our teenagers at 2 a.m.?
So one thing is just ask. Like, I will. So you make a list of people you trust, and then you just call them and say, if I'm in crisis, feeling suicidal, can I call you and talk to you? And then they say yes or no. And then you say, can I call you 9 to 5 or can I call you 24/7? Because that clarity is so important. When you're in the suicidal crisis, you basically have one chance to call someone. And if you call and it's like fishing, you're like, I have one line left. And if you call that person and they don't answer, and it's a lot of pressure, but it doesn't have to be if it's planned ahead.
Now, as we know, there are suicide hotlines, and both in the UK, in the US, all over the world. So in your professional opinion, as the author of Putting the Pre in Appreciation and someone who survived a suicide attempt, what's the difference between calling a hotline where people are trained to deal with suicide and calling a friend who's agreed to talk to me at 2 a.m.?
Both are very important. So when someone calls you and they're suicidal, it's good to know what works and what doesn't work. I had a friend call me, and I went to her house, and I just wrote down all that she was stressed about. This is a good one. Dumping is, you don't let them dump on you, but you write it down so it gets it out of their head onto paper and it loses power. This is a life skill I wish everyone had. If you could call a friend and say, can you just help me get this stuff out of my head? And then you write it down, and then you can look at it and see, okay, this I can deal with. This is not my problem. I can't do anything about it. And so you can kind of see what's taking your energy that you can deal with, and what's taking your energy you have no control over.
Right. So let's say that I have agreed to take someone's phone call at 2 a.m. and talk to someone while they're suicidal. Should I also have the name of a hospital and backup people to call if the person that I'm speaking with takes an action that might be deadly? What are some of the backup things that person who's agreed to be the backup person needs to have on hand?
Yes, so definitely the suicide hotline. You could say, let's three-way call them. Also, 911. I mean, people have called 911 on me and saved my life. So there's definitely, you have to know, and sometimes it's a feeling like, are we going to work through this, or do we need to go get bigger help? So it's definitely, you have the first line of defense, and then
Yes. So on this note, let's take a break from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back. Hang in there, and we'll hear more wonderful wisdom from Tammy Joy Lane. So Tammy Joy Lane, you were 21 years old when you attempted suicide. Were you suicidal? Were you suicidal as a teenager?
when I was 17, I cut my wrist. That was the first time I remember. So I must have been in 11th grade. So I remember feeling like I don't want to be here anymore. Definitely. Teenage, that's a hard year. That's a hard 6 years?
Yeah, and I agree. For me, those times, I agree. 17 was especially hard, and you're not in control. So you were 17 when you first cut yourself. What helped you at that time not commit suicide? Was it a thought? Were you rescued? What happened?
So I remember my friend saw it, and then she talked to my parents about it. So I think just knowing that people cared enough to say something. And that's what I think we get nervous, like, oh, I see this. Do I want to say something? And you don't say something. Like, if you look back, there's signs. There's signs. There's people saying, I'm not okay. And it's not usually, I'm not okay. They're not saying that with their words, but they're saying it with their actions. They're not coming out of their room. They're not, I don't know. There's just lots of things we got to look for that aren't words.
So when you were 17 and you cut yourself, what was your thought process at the time? What was going on in your head that caused you to feel suicidal as a teenager?
So I had gone to prom, and I I felt like I was that girl that was like invited but not included. You know, like there's the center circle, and then I was like halfway in the frame. And so it was just that feeling of like not belonging, or like not being good enough to be like in the circle, but like close enough where it's like that awkward. It's just awkward, you know. I wish we could teach people like the circle's big enough. You can be included too. We can squeeze in and you can get in the picture. You know, it's not just like us and them. There's enough room. There's enough. You can be invited. And then also sometimes you're not invited and it doesn't make you worthless. You know, if people have a party, and that's what's hard with social media. When we were in high school, they had a
Yes, and we've lost your sound again. So, yeah, I fortunately grew up when there was no social media. So there's no photographic evidence of all the stupid things that I did. Thank goodness. And I personally believe, as a medical intuitive healer, that everybody, no matter what our age, we all need a healing to overcome the core beliefs of I'm bad. Many teenagers have gotten the message that they're a bad person. And I think it's really important and critical that we parse out for them. You can make mistakes, but that doesn't mean you're a bad person. Because when someone develops the core belief that they're bad, that will very much lead to self-destructive thoughts and self-destructive behaviors. So people need a healing on, I'm good. I know I'm good. I'm good enough, right? Because other then you get into the cycle, especially with girls, of endless eating disorders and cutting, because they feel like they're never good enough. So helping to overcome these faulty belief systems that lead to suicidal feelings. And hopefully your sound is back. So hopefully you can share with us now.
what was the question?
All right. So what what specific thoughts do you think cause teenagers to feel suicidal?
Okay. Never being good enough. Just what you were saying. I I remember as a teen feeling bad. And as I think church has a lot to do with it, and you know, good, bad, right, wrong. Like we are human, and like let people be human. Humans are late. Humans do things that are messy. We spill, we break things, and it's like it doesn't make you a bad person. I I was on the airplane with my friend and I dropped a cup of ice and I like panicked and I'm like trying to pick, and she goes, "It's ice. It's okay." You know, and if we can just hold our teenager's hand and say, "It's just ice. It's okay. You're okay."
So looking back, having recovered from a suicide attempt at age 21, what messages do you wish you had received as a teenager that could have changed your mind about who you thought you were at the time?
Oh, what do I wish? I wish I got told a lot that I'm
Okay, and we're not hearing your sound again. So I'll speak for myself. I think that teenagers, and again, this is from,
known.
yes, and we lost your sound. So what messages do you think that teenagers need to hear that will help them become more mentally bulletproof against suicide?
I wish I would have known how I talk to myself matters, and that sometimes I need to ask for help on how to get better thoughts in my head. I wish I would have known how to ask for help in health.
Okay, and we can't hear you again. So how to ask for help. So that goes back to having a safety plan. So, so again, going back to having a safety plan helps, and being aware as parents of how we speak to our teenagers and how we speak about ourselves. Um, so can you speak? Hopefully your sound will now work.
Okay. So I wish I would have known that I'm okay and life is going to be hard. And if I fail, that's okay. I didn't know failure was okay. I tried to avoid failure, but now I'm like, the faster you fail, the faster you learn. And then I wish I would have known how important it is to look for the good in others, to help me see the good in myself, and just to encourage and lift. And if I don't feel uplifted or encouraged, that I can do that for others. And so I wish I would have known to give more of what I wanted.
You know, one of the interviews that I remember reading about the first female billionaire, Sarah Blakely, who worked with me years ago, I remember reading about her, and she said that every night at the dinner table, her father asked her, "What have you failed at today?" And it was such a great question, because it's like, number one, everybody fails. Number two, you get the message it's okay to fail. And number three, it's like this, like you said, this is how we learn. So it's acceptable, it's part of life, and it's a can be a learning experience.
Exactly. It's normal. It's normal.
Yes. So many people, you know, lots of sappy people like myself say just love is the answer. If we just love everybody. What do we do with a teenager who's not feeling loved? Even though we may tell them and give them things and hug them, how do we help a teenager feel loved?
I think that goes back to asking them, and having that conversation of, I want you to feel the love the way you want to feel loved. And if feeling loved is leaving me alone for 2 hours and not nagging me, then that's love, and accepting that love looks different during these phases. And not, it's like if a tank's on empty, you're not going to put like a heart sticker on it. It's how do we fill up the tank so the teenager can keep going? It's not just just smile and wave and think, you know, it's how can we have them feel full enough to make it through the day?
Now, some of the statistics show that some of the teenagers who are most at risk for suicide are teenagers who are being bullied, okay, which definitely gives you the message you're not okay or you don't fit in. Gay and lesbian and trans teenagers are definitely at much higher risk for suicide. And also teenagers struggling with any kind of addiction. So whether it's alcoholism or drug addiction. So what advice do you have for parents in these parents of at-risk groups?
I guess my advice isn't really to the parents, it's to everyone else. It's we have to ease up. No matter what your political opinion is, these are human lives. And it's like the statistics between a normal teenager and a trans. No. Can't hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, I
Oh,
can hear.
okay.
Yes.
So it's like, say it's like whatever the percent for normal or for non-trans teen.
Heterosexual teenagers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Heterosexual teenagers versus trans, it's like a huge gap, 30-40%. So I don't care what you believe, you act right. And if you see a teenager going into a bathroom that you don't approve of, you don't say anything. Like, let people be human. And they're already going through so many hard things. They don't need commentary or negative comments. Like, what if it was your comment that they went and died from? Like, okay, fine, believe your beliefs, what works for you, but you got to ease up. You have got to just manage your mouth with that, I guess I would say.
Good advice. Yeah. And as a medical intuitive healer, I always feel the most selfish thing I can ever do is to be kind and generous with everyone. And the reason I feel that and I know that is that whatever energy I put out is what's going to come back to me. So when I judge someone for being different than me, and especially if I project that judgment in my actions or my words, it's going to come back to me. So it's not okay. It's not okay for me. And as you said, we need to be more mindful as a society about how our comments and judgments affect more vulnerable people. So Tammy Joy Lane, any final thoughts for our audience about what we can do to prevent suicide among teenagers?
So I would say get happy. Like what we talked about at the beginning is a happy mom. They have a role model of what happy looks like. And worrying is, like they say, is just saying a prayer for what you don't want. And if your kids see you in constant worry, it's like not something to look forward to. So find a hobby. Find a hobby together, do something they want to do, and just make your home safe, and then the neighborhood safe, and then the world. So let's start with ourselves, because the only person we can change is myself, and then I can ripple out to my kids and our house, because if our house isn't safe, that's not good. At least let them have a safe place to go home to.
Great information. And I have a final thought based on what you said, which is so important, which is worrying. And if I have somebody in my office, I can demonstrate this, but I'm going to describe this. Because if I worry about Tammy Joy Lane, if I worry about her, I literally project my energy onto her and she goes weak and I do also. When I see Tammy Joy Lane and your teenager and everyone around me as whole, and that means complete, not broken, always having access to whatever resources they need, even if it's a phone number, such as the suicide hotline number or the phone number of a friend who will talk to me at 2 a.m. When I see others as whole, then they stay strong and I stay strong also. So worrying does not actually help anything. Seeing everyone around us as whole and complete, that is what actually is helpful. You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today has been Tammy Joy Lane, author of the book, Putting the Pre in Appreciation. Her wonderful work can be found at yestokindness.com. And remember, you can make a difference in teenage suicide when you become more aware about what's happening and change your attitude towards yourself and how you communicate. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.